the CEO, the Chief Delivery Officer and co-founder of Connected Fire. Connect Fire. Welcome. Let's leave this chair empty, and there's another chair empty, unfortunately. Jeremy Charlotte, CEO of Net Omnia, is not able to make it today for personal reasons, but we still have a great panel. And here's our third panelist, Dale Reagan, Chief Delivery Officer and Lloyd Feldman, the founder and Chief Executive of County Broadband. So now we're perfectly all set for this panel. And as I was just saying, the UK market is a market which probably mirrors the challenges, the experiences lots of players in other European markets are currently facing. So I think these insights are really valuable to all of us. But since not everybody is familiar with the UK market, maybe just each one of you introduces his company very briefly and maybe what differentiates yourself from other market players. Let's start with you, Clayton.
Sure, hi everyone. I'm surprised that we all imagine the UK that Europe is obsessed with us. I can't imagine anyone has been following the market intensely, but for those who aren't obsessed with the UK, City Fibre is probably the largest of what we call the alt nets in the UK. We're a PE-funded business. We passed around 3.5 million homes, coming up to about 3 million RFS, on a plan to kind of pass 8 million homes. UK is somewhere around 27 million, so that's coming up to about a third of the homes. We're wholesale only, and our big differentiator, but maybe aside from that, the kind of scale of where we are, is that we tend not to put fibre in the ground unless we know how it's going to be paid for. So we started out with a whole series of wholesale contracts, initially with Vodafone, who were already kind of dedicated to launch the process, and TalkTalk subsequently. We're now up to about 46 ISPs on the network. So I think the differentiation for us is like we have an operating wholesale business in some sense, and we have no direct retail, and we're continuing to roll out.
So you're a wholesale operator? Lloyd, what about your company, County Broadband?
Good afternoon. Good morning. I think that specifically very different. So we are deeply rural in what we do. In much the same way as Clayton has said that you need to, they need to have an anchor tenancy in what they're doing. We don't get that. And the reason we don't get that is because in the UK we haven't managed as successfully maybe as Sweden has done to align standards, SLAs, technologies. So what we've ended up with is a disparate group of over 100 alt-nets, all building in their own way what they think is right, what we think is right. But we haven't managed to present to the market a common platform. So our difference is we sell vertically because we have to. We can't attract the major ISPs and the major CPs, even on the City Fibre network. Not everybody is selling over that network, and that's over 3 million RFS, right? So what can you do if you're working rurally with a few 100,000 RFS? So for us, it's a very different challenge. Key thing, I guess, urban, everybody knows, in the UK, urban's about one premises every 18 metres. Rurally, it's one premises every 80 to 100 metres, so it's 5 times the distance, and typically 3 to 5 times the cost to build.
We'll be talking about these costs and trying to find ways to generate revenues and monetization in a moment. Dale, maybe you can introduce us to Connect Fibre.
Of course, yes. So we are a relatively new player in the market. We were founded back in 2018. I joined the original 2000s in 2019. We secured our funding late kind of 2020 from an infrastructure fund in the UK. Just kind of echoing what Lloyd said, we all kind of do things that we think are different, and we all operate in different manners, and it's quite hard to kind of say what makes us different because everybody does different things. But I suppose from our perspective, being such a young player in the industry, we've managed to do a lot in a very short period of time, and that's more to do with what I like to call innovation and operations. So we are very forward-thinking in terms of introducing machine learning, AI to our operational procedures, and that's what makes us a little bit different. But all in all, everybody's doing the same thing.
Depending on how you look at it, but then if you go into detail, you'll probably find some differences. Let's get started from the headline of this panel, the Greenfield areas. Now, for those of you who might not see the difference, at least from my understanding, the greenfields are the areas where, well, there's next to no infrastructure, so you need to really dig up the streets and set up an infrastructure yourself. Whereas the brownfields, as we call it, there's like infrastructure already there, which you can kind of use to establish your business case on. Clayton, what is the reason why you're choosing greenfields?
Well, because there's no one else there, it's very difficult in many ways. You know, it's becoming crowded, is really the answer. It's a particular problem in London, which we've completely avoided. You know, where there are three networks kind of overbuilding each other quite aggressively. But increasingly, you have to go and look beyond the kind of the core city centres to go and get places to build where, you know, before anyone else turns up. And that's a really key thing. Is you've got 2 or 3 years before someone else is in place, then you have an opportunity to kind of capture the initial market. That's really great. So you know, we still operate in a mixed economy world. Most of those 3 million homes are in what we call secondary cities. They were Greenfield from our point of view. We're now expanding out into the rural basis with kind of support of the government care program. We think that's really exciting because those customers are super unserved. From what we've seen, you know, if you do it right, you drive that stuff in, get some real to get there. And the incumbent is kind of still stuck, right? It can't do everything, it's trying to do everything. And this gives you an opportunity for a few years to go off and do something really interesting.
So you're going into the parts of the market where there's no one before yet, or no one's been there before to be the first. There's only one opportunity to be the first, of course. So this is why you chose that, whereas you were just saying there's other areas, particularly in big cities like London, where people are overbuilding their networks one after another. And this is a different kind of competition, still competition, but of course this is a different business approach. So what about Lloyd, what about your approach in the Greenfields area?
I think it's pretty similar in as much as we're definitely build first as our key strategy. What's happening, even with City Fibre and ourselves, is we're now beginning to look at competing with each other. And there's mixed models in the UK. There was a panelist yesterday who said there was 70 million euros going into Europe on a project, and I thought that's a very small figure. And I 70 million euros. I didn't understand. I thought that's a very small figure. Is that not right? Is it 70 billion?
I haven't been here yesterday, but maybe
70 million to connect the countryside in Estonia.
Estonia, that's what that was.
Estonia.
So we've got 5 billion going into the UK or in sterling. So the challenge you have is in the UK it's a very mixed up chessboard of pieces, right? And we have, I don't know what you're all seeing yourselves, but from our side, we're a growing business and a successfully growing business. But the government has decided it will invest and it will fund. And often that's at the cost of growing businesses, because it will fund another business to build in those areas because they want certainty of build, which is it's an understandable argument. But what it's doing is creating overbuild in the most remote places, which is it's a ridiculous situation, and that's happening in the UK. There is no franchise model such as the one in France.
It's happening in a lot of countries. I come from Germany where it's exactly the same. There's places where they're overbuilding each other, and then there's places where you won't have broadband for fiber for like 5 years now. So this is ridiculous.
I think there's going to be a lot to learn from Germany, from the UK. I think we're going to see a lot of businesses suffer a lot of pain.
Yes.
And I think if Europe it's not too late for Europe to reorganise itself or to learn from what's going on in other places, in other parts of Europe. I think there's a lot that could be done better.
Dale, what about your position with the Greenfields, and how do you maintain your business in this area?
Yeah, I mean, no one can. Everyone would agree, right? It's an uphill struggle. Greenfield for rural premises is hard. They're very, very high in cost to get there. But at the end of the day, we all enter this business to deliver a product to those sort of areas. So we have a bit of a kind of two-stage approach. So we obviously, like all the other events in the UK, utilising BT infrastructure, but then we use that to use that as a catapult to get to some of areas, so we factor it in all of our planning. So when we pick a town, we're looking at what else can we tag around it that is Greenfield. The challenges that we find, obviously, are in overbuild. The UK programme is it's a bit odd, in my opinion, just because suddenly your premises in there, then premises are descoped, we're already planning to build those premises, so it's a bit kind of up in the air. However, we're all competing for the same space, and I think that's the bottom line, and it's kind of, it's a bit of a race, and you've got to have the machine in place to get there, and you've got to have the right team, the right business plan, the right strategy, otherwise you can kind of get consumed into a very, very small market, where you're actually just too focused on rural. And what is that uptake going to be? Just because you go there doesn't mean that, you know, if you don't get it right, doesn't mean that somebody's going to take the product up. So there's a lot more that goes into it. But I think all the altnets are kind of in the same space, and we're all kind of looking at the same way to deliver our products across the UK.
Estelle was just mentioning the challenges. Clayton, what are the challenges you're facing to maintain your position in this market?
Not many.
Not many. You're lucky.
No, I mean, being facetious, right? But we've been pretty successful. I think everyone would agree that the challenges really are that the UK is currently a combination of kind of hyper-manic, direct, raw, in-blooded, kind of capitalist competition, wrapped in a socialist kind of protectionist wrap with the regulator and overreaching incumbent, right? So where we are competing, I think customers are really getting great outcomes. That's not just overbuilt, right? I mean, just the fact that an old has turned up and is competing with the rubbish copper. That's been some great outcomes, and that's really good. We're seeing the destruction of old infrastructure that's of no value and driving some stuff forward. But then you get this really weird socialist wrap. I agree that the UK program is not ideal, right? It's essentially a legacy of the way that the government and systematically tried to do this a number of times before, fed off the public purse and failed to deliver a number of other things, right? So now everyone's terrified of doing the wrong thing. You get this really weird outcome where you get paid to build something, or somebody who's got a plan just doesn't get believed, right? Because everybody's been lying about this stuff for so long, no one can trust in what's going on. So I think our challenges are, we're starting to get into the right place. One, the incumbents have far too much protection and freedom to use its power to kind of attack the various people. Most recently, that's been kind of shocking for years and years and years. They kind of talked about how high their costs were. The instant the altnets turned up, suddenly their costs collapsed to the floor. They were able to do huge discounts. I mean, it's incredibly, I guess they just ignored all those cost savings for 25 years. So we saw a series of price drops in the wholesale space, which were really aggressive, signaling through that market. I think what we're very happy about is that now seems to have stopped, right? So the regulators have stepped up and said, fine, this far, no further. We have certainty of price now. We can all compete on a sensible price basis in that space. There's this macro environment. I think obviously everybody's suffering the same piece in terms of cost inflation, et cetera. Everyone's experiencing this, right? So it's not easy.
These are challenges, not particular in the UK, but challenges in all the markets, the general environment, the economy that is changing. But let's think back to how it used to be a couple of years before now, when the fiber investors, the investors in the fiber companies, were kind of focusing on the big cities because they were thinking that's where we can make the most money the most quickly. Look at the return of investment, and all of a sudden this has changed in my view, and they're now looking at the rural areas. And I can imagine it's becoming very crowded now. There is that something you can see as well, that more and more investors are looking at these greenfields, and it's getting really crowded. There's maybe even too many of them, leading to challenges that we've just heard from Clayton, that the prices keep dropping and dropping and dropping until it's devalued.
I think the market is oversaturated, right? There's a lot of ISPs, there are a lot of altnets, and everyone's got to compete for the same space. I think what we found recently, what we're seeing recently, is a lot of the big investment funds are actually waking up and realising that money that they stuck in 10 years ago was for the wrong idea, right? People see people's for the roof, it was a bit crazy, people kind of sold the dream and didn't deliver. So now a lot of the investors are kind of waking up to that, and a lot of the altnets are also waking up, and a lot of that comes through learning, and I think a lot of that comes through the competition as well. Suddenly you have organisations out there that have kind of been a bit dormant for a couple of years, they've been building away, and then you have another one that comes along, builds quicker, or builds at the same pace, or builds cheaper, and suddenly all the funds start talking. The funds talk to each other, like they all know each other. So there is a lot of competition, there are a lot of bottlenecks, and I think it's also quite easy, and it's quite sad. I mean, if you look at the UK market at the moment, there are a lot of ISPs that set up, get themselves on networks, and then suddenly crumble, right? And that we see is quite a common theme. And a lot of that is just because they can't raise the funds, they can't raise the capital. They may have some startup capital, they kind of get onto some of the open networks and the wholesale networks, and they just can't maintain it. And we're starting to see that. And I think that again is a product of we've grown too quickly in the UK. There's a lot of people who want a bit of the pie, but realistically, there's a lot of organisations out there like Lloyd's have been going quite a long time now. And, they're very mature. Same with 65, they're very mature. We're not mature. We are maturing. But I think there's a lot of augments, a lot of IPs out there that will continue to struggle. But the market's slowly kind of closing up. The consolidation period's happening. Funds are starting to bring everybody together. It is happening, and that should hopefully streamline the industry a little bit more.
Consolidation is interesting, and we'll be addressing that in a moment. I'd like to give Lloyd an opportunity. Since you are, one of the legacy, wouldn't say legacy operators, but long-standing operators probably, what's your position on the development regarding competition at the moment?
I think there's, for us in the UK, you have to remember that there's about 110, 120 on the nets, right? So we need to remember who our competition is, and it's not each other. Right? We should be aligning to address the competition from the incumbent, who is highly aggressive, who is working up his sleeve, as said, hasn't played by the rules, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised by that. All of us, 10 years ago we were all saying, why are they being allowed to advertise FTTC as fibre, right? And the government said, no, it's perfectly okay. People understand the difference. And 10 years later they're saying, actually people don't know the difference. Now it has to be this, now that it suits the incumbents. That's one simple thing. Second thing, the costs, massively inflated costs, and when these government subsidy programs were out, they're being charged these massive costs by the incumbent on clawback agreements that haven't been clawed back. So their costs were lower, their customer take-up was higher, but they haven't clawed back the money. So it's never been an even playing field for the outlets. It never has. Our position now should be one of the right. And I think as Dal says, the funders are beginning to understand that. But I don't think that's filtered down yet to the operators. We're still working independently when we should be working in a much more aligned way.
So that's kind of looking at ways to collaborate or streamline or to create a level playing field. There you mentioned consolidation. Do you think that something is going to happen? And if so, how long will it take?
It's already happening.
It's already happening.
I mean, it's happening to a certain extent. We're seeing funds kind of bring other pots together to create one big pot. We're seeing organisations buy out small organisations. It is happening, and it will continue to happen. I mean, we've got some big players in the UK, and I'm sure that there's a lot of big players that are waiting for their moment to want to grab. But it is happening, and it will continue to happen. How long it takes, I don't know. I don't think anyone will know. Clayton might know.
Clayton might not know. Do you know?
It's like the guarantee is between 6 months and 25 years.
I think you're right.
And we had a strategy paper and stuff, and there are multiple outcomes here, right? 2 networks, 3 networks, 5, 20. I don't think it's going to be 20, but all of those outcomes is possible, right? Lloyd has a great business, right? We could probably run for forever.
I might not survive that, but yeah, I'll give it a go.
Let's see what happens when the consolidation really takes place. But we see the other move as well. For example, in Germany, not long ago, a big fish in the ocean, Liberty Global, decided to pull out of the fiber market because of the general economic situation changing. It's hard to get skilled workers. It's hard to get building companies to dig up the streets, and of course the interest rates have gone up and things like that, kind of really impacting business models in a very negative way. And I was always thinking when I saw that, I mean, if the big guys pull out of the market, what's happening with the smaller guys? But this big wave of people pulling out of the market has not taken place. We had another insolvent company in Germany, but this has continuing now with a lot of medium-sized players involved, which means that I think the investors behind them still believe in that business model and still believe in this concept. Is that something that's mirrored in the UK? Do you think that the medium-sized operators are really going to continue operating, Lloyd?
Absolutely. I think just because we're in the fibre market, it doesn't mean that everybody who's in that space is going to run a good business. And if you don't run a good business...
Despite the changes of the general economy, I mean, if interest rates going up, you're going to be affected.
Yeah, the point is, most of the models have considered higher costs or higher interest rates or lower ARPUs. We all run different scenarios. And as I said, just because you've been funded doesn't mean you're going to run a good business. And there are plenty of examples in the UK of poorly run businesses, very poorly run businesses, and they will fail as a result. We shouldn't be surprised by that. In terms of consolidation, yes, we're seeing the consolidation happen at investor level. Often, it's because of internal failures in those businesses. Even some of the major funds have only consolidated some of their investments. They haven't consolidated all of them. Well, why not? Well, at the moment, they're not ready to. They've consolidated the ones that need help and need to align. They're leaving the others to keep running.
From the small guys to the big guys, this way we've already mentioned what you were saying, like unfair competition from the legacy operators, the BTs and Virgins, and they've just, I think, merged with 3 or announced their merger with 3, so they're getting even bigger. We have the same in Germany, where the biggest cable operator keeps advertising their coax lines as fiber, even though it's not fiber to the home. So is that something you've also got in the UK? Unfair competition?
I think we referenced it earlier, didn't we, Clay? What do you see? You stood on that ground a long time ago and fought that battle. How did it go?
Well, we won eventually, and the prize wasn't worth it, is the issue. Because if you lie long enough, then what you end up with, and this is what we see continually, is when you speak to the subscribers today, they all think they have fibre, but the flip side of that is they don't care. Because incumbents and everybody has been lying to these people and providing a really average service for so long that they don't care, right? They love Netflix, but they don't realise that no one's ever these things. And we have, as an industry, provided terrible service. Horrible service, right? Customers they've swapped networks, it's the same thing, and they just don't believe us anymore. It's not just that Liberty was lying on the Firebase. It's that everybody has been consistently lying to these consumers for decades. And the customers are sick of it, right? They don't care about these networks. Eventually, quality will win out. Eventually, they will realise that this is stuff. You have to be so good now, so good just to be considered as an alternative. And that's the problem we face. We fixed the fibre advertising thing. We're no longer doing that, but no one's paying attention to the advertising anyway.
Well, maybe this is a problem on different levels, because if people are fooled into believing they've got fibre at home, they might not even care that they don't have it, as long as it's running smoothly, they have enough bandwidth, and we see the problem in lots of markets where people roll out fibre, they advertise, they go to the households, knock on the door, say, look, we've got fibre now for you. And people say, I've got broadband, I don't need fibre, I'm happy with what I've got. So we talk about the take-up rate, which is extraordinarily low in lots of markets, where we're thinking like, well, finally, people should be cheering, they've got fibre now, and they don't want it because they've got 200, 300, 400 megabits from classic DSL lines on copper-based, and they're happy with that. As you were saying, people aren't buying bandwidth, people aren't buying technology, people are buying entertainment services like Netflix, like Amazon, like Disney, and so on. And as long as that is functioning, they don't care. Is that a problem? The low interest in fibre by people who, for whatever reason, are just not interested in that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a problem, but the problem is ours to solve, right? It's ours to fix, and the fix for us, and it really works well, as the same as a lot of our net, is the education piece. And I know that we can advertise, we can do a lot of marketing campaigns, but we spend a lot of time, every town that we build, we get to know those towns personally, and go out, not just to door knock and sell, it's to educate that you weren't on FTTP, you didn't have fibre to the premises, but now you do. We spend a lot of time doing that. We spend a lot of time engaging with the local communities, and again, for us, the biggest thing from a sales and marketing perspective is the education, and also from a build perspective in operations. All of our build teams, all of our contractors, they run off the same brief, they run off the same script, they educate the public as they go along. People are naturally inquisitive. Someone comes up to you and says, "What do you do? Why are you digging a hole in my road?" Or why have you just climbed up that telephone pole? So we have a bit of a script that we use, and we tend to find that it works. It doesn't work in every town, because you do go to towns where genuinely people don't care because they've been lying to you for so long. They just kind of go.
But how do you convince people? What's the magic trick?
It happens over time, right? So in our offices, we started building in 2018. We're bumping up to like 4 in 10 homes are converted. What happens over time is some people take it, they like the fibre, they stand the fibre, they do that, and they speak, right?
They talk to their neighbors.
They talk to their neighbors, right? And you see this pattern where there's a bump, then it kind of wanders around, but after a while you get into this 1-2% steady state take every month. Because people are like, "Is that really working?" And the neighbor's like, "Yeah, no, it actually does." And that's what it says, right? I don't think people are happy with ideas like that. They don't when you speak to them, they're not like, "It's great." So I had this wonderful story. I was speaking to an investor, and he was saying, "I don't understand this. The cable network in the UK is wonderful, it's great. I've got a gigabit service. It's absolutely perfect." And I said, "Okay, that's not the experience of everybody. You don't experience a slowdown, at 6 o'clock. It's unusable at 6 o'clock in the evening, but it's great otherwise." I was like, "That's not how the network's supposed to run, right? It's supposed to run continuously all the time." People experience this stuff, and if you continuously deliver a good service, deliver on your promise, eventually they do figure it out. They do want better. They just don't think they can get it.
Lloyd, how do you convince people? What's your experience?
It's a combination of all of these things that have been discussed. Ken, talking earlier, I think Pedro too, said it's not about the technology. It's about the customer experience and your interaction with the customer, right? And we are doing exactly the same thing. We are, at the local level, we're engaging and we're being present so that over time, people are adopting onto what becomes known as better. And it's the expectation of the customer. And if you can deliver the customer service, if you can raise expectation of the customer, generally in the market, to be above what they're currently getting from incumbent services, then you start to have a winning formula and people start to adopt. So we have examples of villages where we have very small percentages of take-up, but equally in the villages where we've been established over time, we have enormous take-up percentages, where that has become common, that this is what to expect.
It's a slow and long process, but in the end it's the quality of service that wins and convinces people. When they talk to the neighbors and they say, "Look, I do not have these problems."
Should we be surprised by that?
So
Should we be surprised that a service that is better than what they can get becomes the more popular service?
Then the monetization comes in that I mentioned earlier on. Maybe then they're even prepared to pay a bit more, like, 10 euros or 10 pounds more per month for a service that offers them less headache.
So I think there's one last thing that hasn't quite unlocked yet. And when that unlocks, I think the customer will have true freedom to choose what they want to choose. And that is the licensing of content delivery. And we're beginning to see that unlock. But it's still, I think, a few more years before that truly becomes separated from the operator. So typically in the UK, we have a BT Sport channel that has all the major sporting events alongside a Sky Sport channel that has all the Sky sporting events, and it's generally between the two. That needs to change, and when that simple thing changes, in the same way that we now all use Netflix like it's common, right? We're also used to using networks. I remember 10 years ago, standing in village halls, saying, "One day you'll choose what you watch when you want to watch it." And people would look at me and go, "What? It's not on a scheduled TV station." No.
Now it's standard, so how things change. I'd like to use the opportunity for Q&A, and there's already a gentleman raising his hand, so pose your question to the panelists. And the microphone is coming. There we go.
that excites people for a while and then it doesn't. So really, my question is, especially the wholesale-only model, what's the story? Why should anyone care? What are the narratives? You know, if we don't exist, 20 years later, this is what you're going to have. And if, because we exist 20 years later, this is why you're going to thank us, or why I'm going to be able to tell my daughter or my son, look at the great things we did. And it's a tough story, I think, because it's a wholesale-only. You're kind of behind the scenes, right? So 20 years later, maybe it's still Vodafone and talk and whatever. But somehow, what have we changed? Why should anyone care? And if you don't, if somehow you didn't exist, what would change? I mean, a lot of people would say, well, OpenReach is doing it anyways now, and it's going to be fibered anyways, why do we care? And it seems to me like, when I follow the UK, that narrative is missing. What's the story? Why should we really care? And 20 years later, what is the vision that 20 years later, 10 years later, you're going to say, isn't it great that we did this stuff and we didn't leave it to OpenReach or whatever? I just want to hear what is the story?
I think there's two sides to that, right?
Yes, please.
There's two sides to that. One is, often in the deeply rural, it isn't wholesale only play. The fact that CityFibre are coming and looking that way, that's the first operator that's looking to go deeply rural on wholesale only. So that's not really been the case, and I talked about it earlier as to why there isn't that wholesale opportunity, because of, the major ISPs and CPs are not held. I disagree actually with Clayton saying the pricing is stabilised, etc. We've just had Equinox 2 launched. It's lowered the wholesale rate, but you only get that discounted wholesale rate if you keep a whole percentage of your business with OpenReach BT. If you dare go with another company, you'll lose your whole discount across the nation. Well, if that doesn't lock in, I don't know what does. So, for me, I think the biggest challenge is not getting the wholesale right. I think the biggest challenge is to align against that competitor. And on the basis of what you're saying, well, why bother having an electric car company called Tesla if Ford are eventually going to make electric cars? This will just go home. That's not what happens. It's an entrepreneurial market. We will rise to the opportunity, and that's exactly what we're doing here. I think we're doing that across all of Europe.
Yeah, I guess one of the most cited reasons that people give for liking what we do when they review us on Trustpilot and so forth, is they say things like, the engineer turned up on time and when he left the service worked, right? That's like 60% of the feedback we get. Our industry, the incumbent industry, is so terrible that we get high praise for just doing the basic thing we said that you're paying us to do, right? And I think that's the legacy we leave behind. In 20 years' time, it's not that everyone goes, I'm really excited that CityFibre was there. In 20 years' time, I fade into the background. I'm a piece of infrastructure. I'm just pulling in PE revenues, and that's great. But what we've done is we've changed the basis of competition so that people expect more of this. The telco is not like the least interesting thing you do with your life. No one wants to call their telco. It's a terrible experience, right? You've switched that from allowing the incumbents to just drift along with to something where people go, this works, it's great, I don't have to think about it, it's always perfect, it works. And I think that's where we will be, right? We're like water, we're like electricity, right? The legacy is that stuff just works. I'm from South Africa, I know what happens when that goes wrong. And we've switched the track from really average to something new. By the way, OpenReach is not doing this in the UK anyway. They're doing that because we exist, right? In 2018, OpenReach announced a program of investment of 10 million G-fast lines, right? Placed in order with Huawei. It's a Huawei salesman somewhere who in 2018 sat down in Salesforce and typed 10 million in a forecast, right? By the end of 2018, that forecast was zero. Because I announced a deal with Vodafone, we started building in Milton Keynes. OpenReach dumped a 10 million home plan in 6 months, right? You think if we go away there and this shift back into kind of dedicating themselves to excellent customer service and rollout? No. Right? We may not win, we may not be here in 20 years, I certainly expect we will be and we plan to. But that's the legacy, is that we've changed ourselves from a path of mediocrity to one where people get the service that they pay for.
So you're just doing your job and people praise you for that, which I think tells a lot about the legacy operators and what the operators are doing. Dale, is that something you're experiencing as well? well.
Yeah, I mean, just can't really say more than that. What Clayton touched on there is right. What we're doing, regardless of whether we are mainly ISP or a wholesale model, we are part of the change. We're creating change, and without us, it would just be BT. It would just be virtual. No one would have the option. They would have the ability to pick and choose, or they would have poor services, and they have to kind of suck it up and just roll, continue with those services. So that's as Pete said, that is the legacy. The fact that we, as an industry, have changed the legacy industry.
And we all know what happens in markets where there's basically no competition. And so here are three people that are stimulating that type of competition for the incumbents, and I think that answers the question quite nicely. Talking about questions, we have room for one more question from the audience until we wrap the session up. Okay, I think you're all happy and waiting for the coffee break. Thank you very much to the panelists, and just a